Welcome, everyone. I'm Andree Bober, and I am the founder and director of Landmarks, which is the public art program at the University of Texas at Austin. I want to thank Tony Sykes and CODAWorks for inviting us to be here today, and also our distinguished panel of speakers. Thank you for all coming and sharing your unique perspectives. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about Landmarks quickly, and then I'll introduce each of our guests, and each of you will make your presentations just like the last round. And then we will have a few questions amongst ourselves and then welcome you to ask any questions you may have. So let's get started with Landmarks. I mentioned that it's the public art program of UT Austin, and just this year we're celebrating our 10th birthday. There are 41 works of public art in the collection, and this includes a large group of 28 modern and contemporary sculptures that are on long-term loan from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This really forms the bedrock of the collection, and over the past 10 years we have added roughly 1 to 2 works every year to the collection through purchases and through commissions. So from the very beginning, we believed that a public art program would enhance our campus in all of the typical ways by beautifying it, by creating a sense of place, and introducing elements of surprise. And we also believe that as an academic institution, it's important to develop our collection with a curatorial eye so that each selection isn't just merely weighted on its own individual merit, but also in relation to the whole. So it's really by design that we have a broad variety of different kinds of works in the collection. There's a small subset that deal with data specifically. Among those, there are 4 artists that we have commissioned to date. Casey Reese is an artist who uses data that he collects and processes through his open source code that he developed with Ben Fry called Processing. Monica Bravo expresses data pictorially through images of geologic data that she has gathered from UT scientists. Then there's James Terrell, who uses data as an infrastructure in that it cues the light sequences that occur at sunrise and sunset every day in his sky space that we have on campus. And then also Ben Rubin, who uses data from multiple sources in the piece that we commission, both the Walter Cronkite Archive, which is at the University of Texas, and also from the feeds of live broadcast news networks, 5 of them. And perhaps you'll talk a little bit about that project when you're here, when you get up to talk. So the only other thing I'll add about Landmarks is that we really pride ourselves on offering a broad range of scholarship and essays and videos and other ways to learn about the collection. Please visit our website if you'd like to learn more. If you're not in Austin, and if you are in Austin, please let me know, and we'd be happy to share the collection with you. We hope you'll visit. So let's move to our panelists. I'll begin with these intros, and then you can each take turns with your presentations. And I'll just add that Rafiq could not join us today, but we're really glad that Andy Merkin is here with us. Andy is the managing producer and director for Moment Factory's Los Angeles office, where he oversees productions that range from infrastructure experiences at airports and bridges to theme parks and other multimedia properties in Western North America. He's recognized as an expert in transmedia productions and storytelling experiences in a digital convergence landscape. Eric, to his left, is a multimedia artist working at the intersection of technology, data, and the body. He is co-founder and creative director of Sosolimited, where he creates sensory spaces driven by design and technology. Eric has created data-driven sculptures, generative fashion, vibrating furniture, and even directed a music video for OK Go. Andrea Polli is an environmental artist who creates public art, including a wind-powered light work covering the Rachel Carson Bridge in Pittsburgh, which we saw in Adam's presentation earlier. permanent pieces for the University of Utah and the city of Albuquerque, and architectural scale works throughout the U.S. and Europe. She is a professor of art and technology with appointments in fine arts and engineering at the University of New Mexico. And you're a Santa Fe resident, too. And then Rubin is a media artist and director of the Center for Data Arts at the New School in New York. Ben is best known for the site-specific installation he's created for the Public Theater, the New York Times building, landmarks at UT Austin, and most recently, the Brookfield Place at Calgary in Alberta. So thank you all for coming, and welcome.
So I oversee the Los Angeles office for Moment Factory. Moment Factory is a design and production studio based in multimedia experience design, based out of Montreal. There are about 350 full-time staff there. We've done over 450 productions spanning over 18 years with the factory. So it's a fairly large established group. We have grown very quickly in the last couple of years. Actually, in 2013, we delivered the Los Angeles Airport, the Bradley International Terminal. This was a $1 billion terminal that was being built, not all our money, obviously, but very, very large infrastructural project to update it. And it was the Los Angeles World Airports Group and the Sardi Design and affiliates really wanted an integrated public art experience for it. So that was the impetus to it. There's 7 different areas of the terminal that we worked on and developed. Some of them involve data visualization, some of them involve shows, some of them are responsive art installations for it. This one in particular you can see, and I'll highlight this a couple of times. This is what they call the Flight Information Display Systems, or FIDS. It's in every single airport. We really tried to make this a data viz piece. Actually, the particles that float around it are being driven by the weather material, or the weather data that's being come in. So it is a subtle artistic way of visualizing some of the data in the area. This is a wider view of the terminal. The time tower, which is right here, is the kind of the centerpiece for it. But then we also created what we call the storyboards. We really try not to use squares. We don't do squares very well, or rectangular screens. So whatever we can do to break it up, make it more of an experience, we try to do that whenever possible. These are also linked, so at certain times this is what we call a show experience, or a show capsule, where all of the screens at a certain time will stop. We try to draw the attention of everybody in the airport, of course, depending on the experience that you want. If you're working by a security system, you don't want people stopping, it causes jams, so we also have more ambient flow experiences to that. Here's a greater layout of the space. So this is the destination board that I just talked about. Here's the storyboards. We have 2 portals, what we call, on the north and south sides. And then we have the welcome wall and the bon voyage wall that I'll cover as well. So here's a picture of the portals in the middle. They are responsive. We have several different capsules, but if you see in here, we actually put in motion sensors, so as people walk by, it triggers the animation of the material, and then all of the content is developed around, similar to as we were seeing in the last panel, developed around the destinations, the arrivals of the different people. If there's a certain flight, we can link that to the arrivals and have content play for that. This was a very, very large project. This project, which launched in 2015 and delivered in 2013 and delivered in 2015, doubled the size of our studio. We've since doubled to our 350 again. So these are very large-scale, long-term projects. One of the elements that we're seeing also is that people are getting away from the traditional work for hire, the commissioned work, and are going more into the operations and services. Because of this type of project, we actually developed a operations department that does ongoing support and maintenance for it. Similar in here, I think I saw one of the videos of it. We have our control room. No, we took that one out. There is a control room. This is probably the last control room that we'll ever do in technology because everything is done remotely now. It looks beautiful, it looks great, but what we're finding is, people would rather run this from an iPad. Well, that was a quick 5 minutes. The other big data viz project that we work on is the Jacques Cartier Bridge in Montreal. This was done as the celebration of Montreal's 375th anniversary, and it corresponded with the 150th anniversary of Canada. So this was a very large project. This is being driven by over 150 sensors that is completely data-driven. We do have a show experience for fireworks shows, but as people, for instance, tweet "Go Canada" or "Go Canadians," "Yay Canadian score," it will actually trigger a goal sequence on the bridge, covering over 2,800 LED and projection lights on the bridge. We also can visualize traffic. We can visualize the color value of the sky as the sun sets. We do have a camera pointed at the sky, so as the bridge comes awake at night, it does have that subtle connection to the environment around it. But it is designed to be self-driven and creating its own living connection to the different data that's occurring in the space around Montreal.
Hey, I'm Gunther. I'm one of the co-founders and creative director at Sosolimited. Our founding story really started with data, and over the last 10 years, officially as a studio, and even longer than that as collaborators, has kind of evolved to take on a lot of different forms. And so I have three very different projects that all are kind of built around different approaches to data that I'm going to share. So the first one, we were all working during the day as like museum exhibition designers and moonlighting as VJs. And we wrote this very sophisticated software that let us like remix television in real time. And so we decided, let's get serious. We had this monthly and we were kind of getting bored with it. And we decided to point our software at the presidential debate. So essentially, we had software that could basically look at the TV stream as a stream of data. So we took all the closed captioning out of the TV signal, and we could analyze everything that was being said by the two candidates. And then we listened to the sound, and we also deconstructed the pixels of the broadcast. And we created a series of different scenes that kind of sometimes overwhelmed you with data, sometimes removed data. We had a bunch of scenes where I'm traveling light today, I only have 3 pictures, but a bunch of scenes where we would like remove their faces and pitch shift their voices, and it was kind of amazing how similar that they sounded, the two candidates, Obama and McCain. We did this in 2004 as well for Bush and Kerry. And so it was this, a really like amazing discovery. We were just playing with these tools we had that we had created and pointing them at something new. And in the course of doing that, discovered like, you can look at an old kind of tired content stream in a totally new way through a data-centric lens, and just all of a sudden expose all this new amazing content. So over the years, we started to get into a little bit more physical-based work and start to work with sculptural forms that were driven by data. And this was a piece we did in Washington, D.C. maybe about like 6 years ago. A think tank called Center for Strategic and International Studies, and they wanted something in the lobby for their new headquarters that was just going to kind of speak to their mission, but just also be a beautiful object. So this is the global data chandelier. And basically, it's this abstract form that as you come underneath it, it coalesces into a world map. And we're showing 3 different data sets. It's GDP growth, energy scarcity, and water usage around the world. And these are World Bank data sets that the think tank is actually using in their day-to-day work. And so it becomes this, there's no screen, there's nothing that tells you what it is. So you walk in, it's a beautiful, intriguing object, and you start to understand that the lighting animations on this object are actually driven by real data. And this is a story that the staff at the think tank could tell to visitors. It's kind of in some sense, it becomes like a storytelling platform. They could tell any number of stories about the data that's being shown on the sculpture. And finally, this is a piece that we finished 2 years ago. It's a atrium in Cambridge, up in Cambridge. We're based in Boston. And the developer who owns the building came to us and kind of gave us this blank canvas. It's this huge open space, and they wanted something that really spoke to the work being done in the building, a lot of like biopharmaceutical life sciences work, but also architecturally they wanted something that would create sound, and like it was a very like inhuman kind of cavernous space. And so we came up with this idea of a sculpture that could essentially like appear and disappear from thin air, and preserve all this beautiful natural light in these sight lines. And so there's 400 of these origami elements that are made out of Tyvek, each independently controlled by a motor. And I should mention, this was a huge collaboration between a group called Hypersonic and another studio called Plebeian, who worked on like just brilliant mechanical designers who worked on all the mechanical stuff. And throughout the day, it's actually visualizing an invisible flock of birds. So there's a screen when you walk in that shows the simulation. This piece really you need to see in motion, so you should check out the movie on our site. But it's just visualizing these birds flying around really slowly through the atrium, through the way that the little origami pieces are opening and closing. And in the end, the piece made no noise. It was like totally silent. So kind of the brief in the beginning was to make this like fountain-like noise, but it ended up being totally silent. But we were extremely happy with the result because it's this amazingly calming experience. Like, you stare at this thing on a screen for months and months, and you just kind of don't know what it's going to look like in person. And we turned it on, and I remember it was like Labor Day, and the building was empty, and I just sat back, and my heart just like slowed down, and my whole breathing slowed down. And it was just like such a good feeling to know that we were bringing this kind of contemplative experience to this very corporate, like, empty space. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about two pieces. I have all still images. I'd love for you to see these pieces animated. They're in the, there's a video in the lobby and also, of course, on my site, AndreaPolli.com or Vimeo. So I want you to imagine a particle that's the size of a grain of salt. And then as if you were slicing a loaf of bread, imagine slicing that grain of salt into 40 pieces. The size of each of those remaining pieces is the size of a particle that's really important to atmospheric science called PM 2.5. It's 2.5 microns. And it's important because it's easily lodged in the heart and the lungs. It can be the cause of asthma in children. It can be the cause of heart disease and even death. And most of the PM 2.5 that we see, especially in urban areas, is coming from the burning of fossil fuels. So about 15 years ago, environmental scientists developed sensors that could read PM 2.5 in real time. And I had been doing a lot of interviews and research with these scientists at NCAR and other places, and developed this work, Particle Falls. So this is actually at COP21, where the historic climate agreement was happened a few years ago. And Particle Falls is when there's very little particulate pollution of PM 2.5, it's a beautiful blue waterfall. But as particulate pollution increases, you see kind of small sparkles over the top of the waterfall in real time. And then, of course, as particulate pollution reaches high and dangerous levels in your local area, you see almost like a fireball. So this work, which I first did in 2008, was really important to me in terms of helping to raise awareness about climate change. But I also it gave me some concern because it wasn't, besides raising awareness, it wasn't really physically doing anything to combat climate change. And so the seed for this project was developed about 15 years ago, and well, it came out of September 11th, actually. So after September 11th, about a month or two, the mayor turned off the necklace lights on the 3 East River bridges at night. And I lived very near those bridges and enjoyed seeing those lights. And the reason they turned the lights off was because of the cost of the electricity. And the city had been hit hard, tourism after 9/11, and it needed to save that money. So I thought, well, what if lights were powered by wind energy? and developed a kind of concept proposal that was really, for me at the time as an artist, completely a fantasy, completely out of reach. But a few years ago, Pittsburgh did a call for lighting this bridge, which was renamed the Rachel Carson Bridge by the mayor of Pittsburgh. And it became a possibility, a reality. So this piece, Energy Flow, uses 16 custom-designed vertical turbines to power 23,000 individually addressable LED lights that animate and light the turbines, of course, and animate based on the wind power potential. So I found a local wind power company. They had already done feasibility studies on the bridge and the wind power potential. So we were able to make this project happen and show the people of Pittsburgh the potentials for getting off the grid and complying with the COP21 agreement. And what was really cool about this project was that it was made with all kind of hacker and makerspace electronics, accessible through our cell phones, so we could update it using our cell phones. And when the White House in 2016 pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, there was a tweet that came out from the White House saying, from the president saying, I care more about Pittsburgh than Paris. And a representative of the mayor of Pittsburgh called me and said, could you turn the bridge green for the weekend in support of the Paris Climate Agreement? And since we had set up the system to do so very easily, I just gave a call to my programmer in San Francisco. He wrote a little bit of code, and we were able to really represent the ideas and the opinions of the people of Pittsburgh within 24 hours of that tweet. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Wow. Such beautiful projects. All you guys. Wow. So I'm Ben Rubin. Center for Data Arts is where I am now at the New School in New York. And I'm going to go so fast through my first 40 slides so that I can, I wish I were kidding, so that I can, wait, up goes forward, down goes forward, so that I can get to one project I really want to talk about. But the point of these slides is in part to show the variety of different types of data that can be expressed through art. In the case of most of these projects, text in various forms, and the varieties of forms of expression of data. So in this case, and the previous slide as well, data is being expressed through performance. This is a performance of the database of the Museum of Modern Art's collection. There's video of most or all of these pieces on Vimeo. This is a visualization in real time of a big conference with, I think, 10 simultaneous tracks, and we're getting live notes and transcriptions and creating a kind of atmospheric video animation. And this was also live in another sense, in that it was a live coding exercise. We sort of showed up with almost nothing and developed the software during the conference in view of everyone. But I'm not going to linger. That's all the content. This is the piece at Landmarks at the University of Texas. And I just remembered that in the course of making this, I actually called Soso for some advice about stripping the caption data, because this piece also uses television closed caption. And we're just working on this simultaneously. I love that those election pieces are really inspiring. So this piece uses television news, and it's a permanent projection onto this building, which is the School of Communication. So I've used more than half my time, almost half my time. I'm not going to say much of anything about this. This is Shakespeare Machine at the Public Theater. This is Shakespeare data. New York Times, likewise. I will say very little, but the data is live, unlike Shakespeare. It's only non-live piece. Got it. So this is a new piece, which is Carole Harbinger in Calgary at Brookfield Place, which is a new commercial development in the center of downtown Calgary. And the concept here was to try to create a conversation, or to create a link, first of all, and hopefully some kind of a conversation in public between the city of Calgary and downtown Calgary, as you may or may not know, is essentially inhabited exclusively by oil companies and oil services companies. So create a conversation between this downtown city and the Bow Glacier, and to sort of reestablish the fact that Calgary is where it is because of the geography of this river, and the bends in it and junctions with other rivers. And the head of this river that Calgary is built on is the Bow Glacier, Bow River, that flows down into the city. So, but there's not much visible connection, so we wanted to kind of create this link. This is just the notion of listening to the glacier, which is what we're trying to do. What we did with this project is to install, these are some tests we were doing with hydrophones, but in the end we installed these geophones, which register the seismic activity just adjacent to the glacier. So we're hearing the movement of the ice as it freezes, it melts, expands, contracts, moving actually constantly. So that's the sensor installation, solar powered. And this is some of the data that we're getting, XYZ displacement of the sensor. And so we're recording this and beaming it down the mountain and up to a satellite, and pulling it in real time to our site here in Calgary, and representing this data as sound. There are 16 benches which direct sound into the plaza here, as well as the visual display, which sort of interprets the vibrations visually as a kind of seismic graph that's moving. And the third modality here is just looking at the ways that the forces of the glacier are pushing the ice in different directions. The plaza surface itself is laid out in this pattern. It's cut pieces of granite. And, sort of, the concept is as if the glacier has sort of pushed its way across its surface, and we're seeing the warping and distortion of formerly straight lines into being bent by the glacier's force. And, so there's nothing really didactic about this. There's no explicit message to the oil companies that inhabit this building, but except that every time anyone who works in this building walks through this plaza, they hear the cracking and the groaning and the popping of the ice as it moves, and it's something to think about. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about creating this sort of whole experience of this plaza and the entry to the building. And the piece just kind of launched really this summer, so it's finding itself in terms of how people experience it. That's it.
Thank you. What a great group of work to look at, especially all together, side by side. Thank you all. Data visualization, it's not exactly a mainstream term, and those who are familiar with it typically apply it in the realm of graphic design. You're using it in a slightly different realm, in the visual arts. I'm curious, how do you define data? What does it mean to you? And why do you find it interesting? Ben, do you want to kick us off?
You know, I felt like I suggested this question, and I felt like I had such a clear sense of the answer, to it. Of course, there's not really any one answer, but I think, to me, what's interesting in each of these projects is, in fact, the questioning of what is data, what is the data here, what is making data, So in the case of the New York Times project, the data was, well, the New York Times. They write, they write and publish 200 to 300 news stories every single day. And so Mark Hansen and I, who was my collaborator on that project, spent, 3 years, I guess, meeting reporters, meeting editors, hanging out in the newsroom, looking at the history of how the New York Times has operated, looking at it as this sort of factory all the way to its printing presses, just thinking about how the news gets made so that we would understand what this data is and maybe what to do with it. And I guess that's an example of that question of what is data is one I feel like each project you kind of get to answer it again.
For me, when I was thinking about this question, I work a lot with environmental data, did a lot of sonification work of weather data and climate data, and so at first I thought the data is a material, right? But it's a material that does have, to me, an inherent shape. So a weather system like a hurricane is going to have a very different shape than a climate system over 30 or 40 years. And this is a terrible metaphor, but this is all I could come up with, and it kind of fits. It's like a piece of driftwood because it's material, but it has that shape and that form that then informs the work for me.
Yeah, it's like inscribed with a history of a process, and yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think like another way of thinking about data is like a lens on the world, and it's an interesting thing about like a lot of your projects, Ben, is that like most people don't think of text as data, but you take this totally different view on it, and it becomes a data set. And so, or images, like we do a lot of work with images, and you don't think of images as data, but when you look at them as data, all of a sudden you have this new ability to deconstruct a phenomenon and to sort of like pull it apart, and that affords you a totally new approach and a new way into like, something like Shakespeare, which is a very old set of content.
Yeah, I love that way of framing it, actually. It makes me think that I do a lot of work, I'm thinking about sound, and there's a way of listening to sound that you can kind of train yourself to do, where you kind of tune out, the actual content or source. You try to not pay attention to what makes the sound or what it means, but just listen to the sound as pure sound. What is the kind of highs and lows? What is the texture of it? What is the rhythm of it in a very kind of abstract and essential way, so you can experience it. You can experience a performance or speech not as speech, but just as pure sound. And it gives you a different way of understanding it. And I never really put that together with sort of datafying of things, but it's related.
Eric, you posed a really good question in our conversation about the role of data in our work and how do you see it. I'd like to ask also how each of you how you feel about data in terms of how it relates to the art of your art. Is it more in the processing? Is it more in its presentation? Does the art lie somewhere between that realm, and why?
Something you just said, Andrea, data as a material, I think is really interesting because like data science is all about like pattern finding and like looking for patterns. And in some ways, like, you know, a big part of art making is about pattern making. And so there's this like interesting thing that can happen, like, you know, like you said, like you look at it and you see all these patterns and that becomes the sort of art sort of grows out of that. And I think there's something really interesting there.
I want to kind of take this in a different direction too, because I think as artists, a lot of us are using this real-time data. And you talked about data scientists. It's really been an interesting journey for me to work with scientists, especially with environmental data, that, you know, I'm using real-time data. It's not clean. You know, it hasn't been looked at by the scientists and confirmed that, you know, the instruments aren't broken, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a story of the ozone hole not being detected for 10 years because the scientists just thought it was bad data, but it was actually good data. So, you know, for me, I think that's an interesting place between that fuzzy line between the artist and the scientist is when you're using the data that's real time, hasn't been confirmed, hasn't had a scientific analysis done on it, but is still maybe has some aesthetic quality.
We also always say that data, no matter what, if it is real time, it's always historical. There's no such thing as data for the future. It just doesn't exist. So the visualization is the future part of it, of how do you present information to people that they haven't seen before. They know the information. They know, you know, they know that your flight's late. Okay, that I understand that concept. But how can we visualize it? How can we add an art element to it that has not been seen, that does engage people to say, it's not just my flight's late, it's that there's weather affecting it. There's, you know, I haven't thought of seeing it in this way. We didn't see the hole in the ozone, but when you do it in an artistic manner, whoa, something's there. It's not bad data. It's something could be there.
Nigel Thrift, the geographer, talks about remembering forward and has kind of looked at how prediction that has become so much a part of our cultural experience of data has changed our perception.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for your questions. And as someone who commissions artists to create works, I'm particularly interested in your answers. What conditions enable you to make your best possible work?
Sure. So for us, the number one criteria that we have, it has to be a social experience. We do not ever treat something as individual. You can only tell a story to one person, but we want other people to be around. We want a group reaction to it. We want that momentum for a certain set of people to be there and have that experience drive in a certain direction. I mean, our motto for the factory is we do it in public. So we don't, it's one of the reasons we don't do VR. We don't do anything that's isolating. So number one, it's that. The second is we don't like a blank canvas. It seems odd to tell to a whole bunch of artists, but we want that environment. We want that signature space to be there. We want the architecture to exist. We want the history of the space. We want that to define the signature of it. It's great for working in airports because that sense of place is there. You know, our nightmare would be to have somebody arrive at an airport, make it all the way to their car, and then realize they're at the wrong destination. You know, you should know the second you're there where you are. You know what's the signature of the city or location that you're at, and we want to embrace it and highlight it.
Quick answer for me, I think like just unusual data sets and unexpected stories coming out of them. I think that's one of the things that excites us the most. Like when we get some data set, like whether it's 311 data from Boston or whatever it is, and all these like unexpected stories start to emerge, that gets us really excited about working with data.
I like to see, just because I know there's a lot of people who are in with public art commissions and things, it's been really amazing in cities where the public art commission works with the city agencies, the electrical company, the water, all the facilities, and they're at the table from the beginning and can bring their creative ideas on how to pull off the project. So getting that kind of team together from the perspective of the Public Art Commission is so important from the perspective of artists.
For me, there's a condition that has been super important in a lot of these pieces is that the ability to make a data artwork is really very closely linked to the fact of there being some data of consequence that's has a real tie to the site, and often that's quite a large challenge, you know, to either to find that data without just creating some sort of arbitrary connection with passing traffic or pedestrians or whatever, but rather to really find some data that has some meaning and importance, and is unique to that place to make it a site-specific work.
Right, so that there's relevance in the work to the place where it's cited.
There's
that makes
a
sense.
reason to make it a data artwork.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Great, thank you all so much.